Okay, so yesterday we began our adventures in learning how to work with a ballpoint pen to create value. And yesterday's focus was on mark making to create value. And so we talked about using hatch lines, which are lines that go all in the same direction. Less lines obviously equals lighter value. As I gradually progress with more lines, I end up with darker value. I can then use those hatch lines to shade and create a three-dimensional effect on the surface of geometric shapes. Hatch lines can also go in what we call a contour hatch. And so on a shape like the sphere, when you hatch with just straight lines, the illusion of depth can be sort of less convincing. So you can use curved lines. It is trickier. You have to work a little slower. Ideally, hatch lines are not supposed to cross each other. So you do have to work slow when you're thinking about working in a curved surface like that. But you can see straight hatch versus curved hatch. The curved hatch sphere definitely looks a little more convincingly three-dimensional. The third technique we worked with, and then the second technique we worked with was crosshatch. Crosshatch uses a series of crisscross lines in multiple directions. Again, the lines should always be straight. The more directions, the more you cross the lines, the darker the value gets. Whenever we're working in pen, the more that the paper shows through, the lighter the value. I always like to work from light to dark because once you have gotten rid of your lights, you can't get them back in pen. So making sure that you're thinking about that as you're working. And then the third technique we talked about yesterday was Scumble, which is kind of scribbling with style using a pen. And you can see in yesterday's examples, all three of these techniques have a distinct visual texture. Now, that distinct visual texture could certainly be used to your advantage when creating a piece of artwork, but sometimes when we make artwork, we don't want visual texture and we just want smooth value. Now, uniquely for us, a ballpoint pen can be used to create smooth value, and that is what we're focusing on today. So I do want you to do a value scale and each of the four basic shapes, the same as we did yesterday, using this smooth value technique. Now, this smooth value technique is a little tricky to get the hang of, and today I want you to think of it as practice, right? So if we call today smooth value, you can see I've done a little value scale using the smooth value technique. I also have a sphere and a cube that are finished here on my sheet. Technically, if we get really, really close or really, really picky, smooth value is a cross-hatching technique where the hatch lines are really like fine and glancing on the surface. So the goal is to be able to make really smooth marks with the pen, and it has to do kind of with the way you use the pen. So if I'm going to make marks, I am actually pushing the pen into the surface of the paper. When I am seeking to make smooth value, I need to find the spot on the pen that will put ink down on the surface of the paper. And instead of making a mark specifically, I am allowing the pen to kind of glance along the surface of the sheet. So you can see here, and then it is a lot like working in a pencil. So I have this light value that I can build up, and I'm just going to keep extending it down. And it's all about building up the layers. I find that if I rush, I'm more likely to leave marks or lines, and then One thing you can do is you can turn your sheet. So I can turn my sheet of paper and sort of come from the different directions. So I find like a 45-degree angle to be my comfort zone for making this kind of mark. And so I have discovered that if I turn my sheet, so you can see I'm just adding another layer up here where I want it to be a little darker. And now I'm just going to extend that value down. I have practiced this quite a bit. So I very quickly was able to manipulate the pen into making this sort of soft ink layer on the sheet. This will take practice for you. So the same as anything else that's new, you're going to have to play around a little bit to find the comfort spot for you and to learn to lay this kind of ink down on the paper without a mark. So it's kind of, like I said, it's a glancing brush at the surface of the paper with the pen so that the ink just barely comes off. And it reminds me more of shading with a pencil. I'm like kind of moving my hand and the pen the same way I would work with a pencil. And then it's, like I said before, it's just that gradual buildup of the values themselves to create this smooth, soft pen effect. So this is just an additional technique. We are working our way towards creating our project in ballpoint pen. And this is just like Hatch, Crosshatch, and Scumble yesterday. This is another technique for you to use and utilize as we move into the project. So you can see I'm gonna have to work on this for a while in order to get it as dark as this one. So it's just a lot of like careful layers. Don't be afraid to kind of play around. You can see down here at the bottom of the sheet, like I was messing around with how much pressure, how hard can I push and still keep the value fairly smooth? Can I work in like loops or circles the way I would in a pencil? So when I tell you this is practice, this is what I mean, that there are going to be some like ugly bits. There are going to be some spots where you're like, oh, that gets more crosshatchy. And you can even see here in my sphere where I've kind of wanted to work a little faster or have lost kind of concentration. And my pen marks get a little rougher. So you do have to kind of get in the zone for this. And then it's just all about building up. So we talked yesterday a little bit about that. Ballpoint pens are great because they're pressure sensitive. So when I go to make my outline for my shapes, I want to try to keep them as light as possible. Because as soon as you have a hard outline, they no longer look particularly convincingly three-dimensional. So go ahead and work with the basic shapes. You'll also discover that every once in a while the pen will like poop out an ink turd, and you do have to kind of work around those. Like I just ended up with one there on the bottom of my cone in the spot that's supposed to be light, so it's gonna have an ink turd. Having a little spot every once in a while on the edge of your paper or on a second paper or a tissue to just wipe the ink goober off the edge of the pen can be a really great habit to get into. But you can see as I'm shading these shapes, I'm gonna work the same way I did for the value scale. I'm starting as light as I can, and I'm gradually gonna build toward the darker. You can go ahead and use yesterday's shapes, the photo that I have there, as reference for what the values should look like. Remembering that you're working now in soft layers. So there's a reason yesterday we were able to do 3 in class, and today I'm only asking you to do this 1. This is a really new skill probably for most of you. You've maybe never pushed a pen to work this way exactly before. So there's going to be a learning curve and a practice that needs to happen just to get the pen to create this sort of soft mark. And then it is all about just really soft layers to shade the shapes and make them look convincing. So it is why today you are going to shade for me the same 4 shapes as yesterday. And that is your only assignment. So I want you to really think of this as practice, and I want you to make sure that you're mastering it rather than just trying to do it as quickly as possible and being done. Today is not about done. Making art is never about being done, actually. It's about making the artwork. So make sure that you are kind of thinking about the practice aspect and that you are working on perfecting your technique today as we move into building our skills with a ballpoint pen. It is one of my most favorite art supplies, actually. Something really lovely about working with a pen. So hopefully you enjoy it as well once you get the hang of it. And remember to do all 4 of our basic shapes and 1 value scale. You can do this right in your sketchbook with your black ballpoint pen. Remembering that you're kind of focusing on achieving this smooth value today instead of making marks like yesterday.